most amazing artists. I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Welcome to week 2 of our folk art landscapes. This project is an original lesson by Deep Space Sparkle, and I will leave her link down below. Last week in week 1, we learned all about the folk artist Mattie Lou O'Kelly. She grew up with her family on a farm in Georgia. And when I say that she's a folk artist, I mean that she's a part of the folk art genre, which is where an artist will just teach themselves how to create art. They haven't been formally trained and they haven't gone to school for art. They just sit down and they teach themselves how to create something. For O'Kelly, she focused and she really loved to draw and paint landscapes, specifically farmlands, because that's what she grew up on. So that is what has inspired our project. And last week we drew our landscape and we outlined it with a Sharpie. We also made our lines a little bit thicker by drawing parallel lines next to our original lines and filling it in. So now that we have our landscape laid out with our foreground, our middle ground, and our background, today is all about adding a few more details to our landscape before we color it next time. The details we're going to add are we're going to make some of these hills look like they are plowed fields, kind of like how you would see on an actual farm. We're also going to add some trees in the foreground, middle ground, and background. And today is a great day. If you want to, you can add some animals into your farm. So all you're going to need today is your landscape from last week and a Sharpie. You may also want to use a pencil if you like to draw with pencil first and then go over it with Sharpie, because if you do it that way, then if you make a mistake, you can just easily erase it as long as you draw light enough, right? If you draw with pencil super dark, then it's going to be very hard to erase. However, today I'm just going to be brave and I'm going to skip the pencil and I'm going to go straight in with my Sharpie. And that is everything you're going to need today, so let's go ahead and start adding details to our landscape. I'm going to start down here in the foreground. Remember, the foreground is everything that's in the front. If something is in the front, it's going to be bigger. It's going to look closer to you. So if I put my hand to the camera, it looks very big because it's closer to my phone camera. As I pull my hand away, it gets smaller and smaller, and that's kind of how a landscape works. So everything in the front is going to be bigger, in the middle ground it's going to get a little bit smaller, and in the background is going to be the smallest, because in the background everything is farther away from you, so it's going to look smaller. And we want to think about that while we're adding our details today. And the first detail that we are going to add to this landscape is we're going to draw some lines in some of our spaces. We're not going to draw lines in every single one of our spaces that we made last week, because then our landscape might get a little bit confusing and a little bit cluttered, and we don't want that. But we want to draw some lines in here to represent the plowed fields that you would normally see on a farm. And while I'm drawing these lines, I'm going to be thinking about that element of art space. Everything in the front is closer, and as it gets back towards the background, it's going to get smaller and smaller. So the way that we're going to do that is in my hills up towards the front, these lines that I'm going to draw are going to be spaced out more. Okay, so I'm doing about a finger spacing up here in the front or in the foreground, and I'm just drawing some parallel lines inside of just one space for now. Like I said, you're not going to draw lines in every single space, because then that would just be too many lines. So just in maybe every other space, we're going to draw a few lines. And I spaced my lines out in the foreground about a finger width, because as we get back towards the background, our lines are going to start getting closer together, and you'll see what that looks like in just a minute. Okay, I think I'm going to leave these two spaces just white for now in my foreground, because like I said earlier, I don't want to add lines to every single space. So let's move to the middle ground. Now when we move up towards the middle ground, our lines that we're drawing are going to get closer together. So instead of a finger width apart for my middle ground, I'll just draw them a little bit closer together now. This is going to make it look like these hills are farther away. And for these lines, I forgot to mention, I'm using curved lines. I'm not going straight up and down, and I'm not going straight side to side. I'm doing slight curves to make it look like these hills are rounded. And for my next middle ground space, I think I will go to this one here, and I will draw some more lines. But like I said, this is the middle ground, so we want them to be closer together than we made them in the foreground. All right, I'm done with my foreground and my middle ground. And now I'm gonna move to the background. Now our lines are gonna be even closer together. So they're going to be very, very close together in the background. So as I draw them, I'm only leaving a little bit of white space in between each line. And by doing this, it's going to make our background look like it's much farther away than our foreground is or our middle ground is. Okay, so I have my curved parallel lines and only some of my spaces. Remember, we want to leave a few spaces just white. And as we go towards the background, our lines are getting closer and closer together. Now we can start adding some trees. To draw the trees, we're just going to draw it right on top of what we've already drawn. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a couple of curved lines to make it look like a tree trunk. And then we're going to draw some simple branches. To draw these branches, you're just going to do some diagonal lines that are connected to each other. Some can be wider, some can be longer. And while we draw these trees, you can see mine is not very realistic. We're just using simple lines and simple shapes to draw the branches on our trees. And really here, I've just used some diagonal lines to make triangular shapes for my trees. And I am going to color my tree in. As you can see, since we started in the foreground, this tree is pretty big. It's almost as big as the hills in my foreground as well. As we get towards the middle ground and the background, our trees are going to get smaller and smaller to make it look like there is depth in this landscape. After you draw the basic shape for your tree, you can add more branches if you want to by just drawing some triangles connected to the triangles we've already made and filling those in. You can make some skinnier, some wider. Really depends on how you want your tree to look. And after you draw your trees and you color them in, you add as many branches as you want to, we are going to draw some circles around this tree to represent the leaves on our tree. All right, there's one of my trees done. I just drew it. It's in the foreground, so it's pretty big. And I used just little circles, some bigger, some medium, some just little dots to represent the leaves on my tree. And I'm gonna draw another tree on this side. I'm gonna do the same exact thing that I did over here. So what I did was I just drew two curved lines looking like the trunk of a tree. I'm gonna go ahead and fill that in because sometimes these lines that we've drawn in our hills can get a little bit distracting and make drawing our tree kind of confusing. So I like to color it in as I go. So there's the trunk for my tree. And now I'm going to start drawing just some triangular shapes all the way around until I get to the other side of my tree. And I'm going to fill that in. After you have the basic shape of your tree with your triangular shapes at the top and your trunk, you can go in and add some more diagonal lines to make some more triangular shapes that come off of what we've already drawn here to make it look like the branches on our tree. And after you're happy with the general shape of your tree and your branches and you filled it in, you can go around your tree and add some dots that represent the leaves of your tree. All right, so there are the trees in my foreground. I'm not gonna add another one because I don't want just the foreground to be only trees. I still want to be able to see those hills there. Now I'm gonna move to my background. I'm gonna do the same exact thing except for my trees are going to get much smaller. And I'm gonna draw these trees that are in my middle ground and my background exactly the same way that I drew them in the foreground. They're just getting smaller as they go to the middle ground, and your background trees are gonna be even smaller than your middle ground ones. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and finish up my trees, and then I'll be back to show you what it looks like. And I just finished finished adding my trees to my middle ground and my background. Now in the background, if you're using a regular Sharpie like me, you might, if you have it at home, use a skinny Sharpie to get those little details back there, because it was kind of hard with this one when it has a wider tip on it to get those details super small and precise. Now you can stop here, or you can add a couple animals here and there. Maybe you want to draw a horse, or maybe you want to draw a cow or something. If you do want to draw an animal, then you need to be mindful of where you're placing it. If whatever animal you choose to do is up towards the foreground, then of course your animal is going to be a little bit bigger. If you place your animals in the middle ground, they're going to be a bit smaller. And if you place any animals in the background, then they are going to be super small. And if you decide to do animals, it might be a good idea to use a pencil first, just in case we make any mistakes. I'm not going to add any animals to mine, but feel free to do so if you would like. So after you're done adding your lines to your plowed fields to the foreground, middle ground, and background, and adding your trees to the foreground, middle ground, and background, then you can be done for today, unless you choose to add some animals, and then you can do that as a last step. I hope you guys had a lot of fun adding these details to your landscape today. I can't wait to see how they turn out. I know they're going to be amazing because you guys are amazing. All right, I'll see you guys next time. Bye, guys.